Ella Winslow's alarm went off at 4 p.m., which meant she'd managed 3 hours of sleep between her morning shift at the hospital cafeteria and tonight's catering gig. Her phone screen showed 2 missed calls from St. Vincent's billing department and 1 text from her brother's nurse. "Tyler's asking for you. Counts are stable, don't worry." Don't worry. As if that were possible when every platelet transfusion cost what she made in a week. The elite catering van picked her up at 5:30, along with 12 other servers who looked as exhausted as she felt. Nobody spoke during the 40-minute drive out of the city. When they finally turned onto a private road that wound through snow-covered woods, Ella pressed her face to the window and forgot how to breathe. Ashford Manor rose from the winter landscape like something out of a fever dream, all Gothic spires and leaded windows that glowed gold against the twilight. Gargoyles perched on corners, stone angels guarded the entrance. The driveway alone was longer than her entire street back home. "First time?" the woman beside her whispered. Ella nodded. "Don't stare at the guests, don't speak unless they speak first, and whatever you do, don't go into the north wing. They're very particular about that." Inside, the briefing was terse. Mrs. Kovacs, the head coordinator, was a severe woman in her 50s who looked like she'd perfected the art of making people feel small. "You are invisible tonight. You are furniture with legs. You exist only to serve. The Ashford family and their associates value discretion above all else. One misstep and you'll never work in this city again." Ella's assigned route took her through the main hall, the conservatory, and, if requested, the East Gallery. The North Wing, she was told again, was absolutely forbidden. Private family chambers, no exceptions. The gala began at 7. Ella had expected wealth, but this was something else entirely. The guests moved with an otherness that made her skin prickle. Too graceful, too still, dressed in fashions that seemed to span centuries. A woman in a Victorian gown conversed with a man in what looked like Renaissance court dress. Nobody seemed to age past 30, and nobody seemed to blink enough. Ella circulated with her tray of champagne, perfecting the art of not being seen. She observed everything. The way conversations stopped when she approached, the way certain guests watched her with an intensity that felt predatory, the way the temperature seemed to drop wherever they gathered. Then she saw him. Stephen Jones stood near the fireplace, and unlike every other guest who commanded attention through movement or voice, he commanded it through absolute stillness. Hair white as the snow outside, pulled back from a face so pale it looked carved from marble. Ice blue eyes that seemed to see through everything they touched. He wore black formal wear that probably cost more than Tyler's last hospital stay. And he didn't speak, didn't drink, didn't move, yet every person in the room oriented themselves around him like planets around a dark sun. Ella looked away quickly, but not before those eyes found hers for exactly 3 seconds. 4 hours into her shift, a butler approached her. "The gentleman in the north study requests a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem. You'll find it in the restricted cellar, second door past the marble staircase." Ella's stomach dropped. "I was told the north wing was—" "The gentleman has requested it specifically." His tone made it clear this wasn't a discussion. The corridor leading north grew colder with each step. The sounds of the gala faded behind her until all Ella could hear was her own breathing and the whisper of her shoes on stone. The walls here were older, darker, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her movement. Sconces flickered with real candlelight instead of the electric chandeliers of the main hall. Then she heard it, a voice speaking words she didn't recognize, rhythmic and ancient, rising and falling like a tide. It came from behind a door that stood slightly ajar, spilling golden light across the floor. Ella knew she should keep walking, should deliver the wine and get back to the safety of the crowd. Instead, she stepped closer and looked inside. The chamber beyond the door belonged to another century. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames casting shadows that moved against the laws of physics. The floor was bare stone, and painted across it in what could only be blood or symbols that hurt to look at, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe when Ella's eyes tried to follow them. Stephen Jones knelt in the center of the circle, head bowed, both hands wrapped around a chalice that pulsed with light the color of dying stars. He was drinking from it, and with each swallow, the symbols around him glowed brighter, pulling the shadows in the room toward him like a vortex. Ella's breath caught. The wine bottle in her hands suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Stephen's voice rose, speaking those alien words with increasing urgency, and the light from the chalice began to burn so bright it turned the air white hot. This wasn't a party. This wasn't some eccentric rich person's theater. This was something ancient and wrong, and the wine bottle slipped from her numb fingers. Glass exploded against marble with a sound like a gunshot. The vintage Chateau d'Yquem spread across the threshold in a dark pool, and Ella couldn't stop the scream that tore from her throat, raw and terrified and utterly human in that inhuman space. Stephen's head snapped up, their eyes locked. The chalice tumbled from his hands, and the liquid inside, thick and luminous and definitely not wine, spilled toward the edge of the circle. The symbols flared from red to blinding white, and Ella felt something punch through her chest with the force of a lightning strike. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. There was a heartbeat thundering in her ribcage, but it wasn't hers. It was too slow, too strong, ancient and cold and furious. She could feel rage that wasn't her own, desperation that had burned for centuries, and underneath it all, something that felt like recognition. "No," Stephen breathed, but his voice sounded like it came from underwater. "No, the ritual." The door behind Ella slammed open. Guards in dark suits poured into the room, and they weren't holding batons or tasers. They were holding weapons that gleamed silver in the candlelight, swords, daggers, things that looked like they belonged in museums. "The human witnessed the blood rite," the lead guard's voice cracked with panic. "She has to die, now, before—" "Stop." Stephen rose to his feet in one fluid motion, and every guard froze mid-step. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Ella's bones ache. "She's bound to me now. The ritual took her instead of breaking the curse." Ella tried to speak, tried to move, but that alien heartbeat in her chest was all she could focus on. She could feel him, actually feel Stephen Jones like he was standing inside her skin. His shock, his fury, his horror. "That's impossible," the guard whispered. "The bond can't form with a human. It's forbidden. The court will—" "Look." Stephen gestured toward Ella, and that's when she saw it. A thread of crimson light stretched between them, faint as spider silk, but undeniably there. It pulsed in time with that double heartbeat now drumming in her chest, hers fast and panicked, his slow and inexorable. Where the thread touched her sternum, her skin glowed with the same eerie luminescence as the spilled liquid from the chalice. "I claim her as bound servant under the old laws," Stephen said, and though his voice was calm, she could feel the chaos roiling beneath it through their connection. "She is mine to protect, mine to command. Any harm that comes to her comes to me." The guards exchanged glances. One of them spoke urgently into a radio. Two of them grabbed Ella's arms. She tried to fight, but her legs wouldn't support her weight. The heartbeat, his heartbeat, was getting stronger, drowning out her own rhythm until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. "What did you do to me?" she managed to gasp. Stephen's ice-blue eyes met hers across the ruined ritual circle, and she felt his answer before he spoke it, felt it like a brand against her soul. "I damned us both." The guards dragged her backward through the door. The last thing Ella saw before they hauled her into the darkness was Stephen standing motionless in his circle of broken magic, watching her disappear with an expression that might have been regret. Then the door slammed shut, and she was alone with a stranger's heartbeat locked inside her chest, beating a rhythm that promised she would never be free again. Dawn crept through a narrow window set high in the stone wall, turning the cell from pitch black to merely gray. Ella hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt that secondary heartbeat pulsing beneath her own, slower, steadier, maddeningly present. She'd tried everything to make it stop, holding her breath, pressing her hands against her chest, screaming until her throat went raw. Nothing worked. Stephen Jones lived inside her ribcage now, and there was nothing she could do about it. The lock clicked. Ella scrambled to her feet as the heavy door swung open, but it wasn't a guard who entered. It was him. Stephen looked exactly as he had at the gala. Immaculate black suit, white hair perfect, not a trace of the chaos from hours ago. Only his eyes betrayed him. They were darker now, storm gray instead of ice blue, and when they settled on her, Ella felt an echo of something that might have been concern ripple through the bond before he locked it down. "Sit," he said, not a request. "Go to hell." "I've been there. It's preferable to this." He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, studying her with the detachment of someone examining a lab specimen. "Your scream interrupted the unbinding ritual. Do you understand what that means? That you're insane? That I walked in on some psychotic cult gathering? That the ritual's energy had to go somewhere." His voice was flat, clinical. "It was designed to break an ancestral curse by consuming my life force. Instead, when you screamed, it bound to the nearest living thing, you." Ella's laugh came out broken. "So undo it." "I can't." "Then find someone who can." "There is no one." Stephen pushed off the door and moved closer, and Ella hated that she could feel him approaching even with her eyes closed, could sense the exact distance between them through the cursed thread connecting them. "The bond is absolute. If I die, you die. If you die, I die. If we're separated by more than a mile for more than an hour, we both die. There is no breaking it, no negotiating with it. We are linked now, permanently, until one of us ends." The cell suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. "I'm trapped? Forever? With you?" "We're both trapped." Something flickered in his expression, not quite sympathy, but close. "Believe me, this is the last thing I wanted. You were supposed to be invisible, background noise. Instead, you've become the most dangerous person in my world." "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I." Stephen's jaw tightened. "I was trying to save my bloodline. Morgana's bloodbound vengeance, an ancestral curse laid on my family 3 centuries ago. Every 7 generations it awakens and consumes everyone who carries my blood. The winter solstice is in 30 days. That's when it activates. That's when everyone I'm connected to dies screaming." Ella sank onto the stone bench, her mind reeling. "And now I'm connected to you. Now you're connected to me." He said it without inflection, but she felt his rage through the bond, cold and vast and carefully controlled. "The curse will take you too when the solstice comes, unless we find the blood grimoire." "What's that?" "The only artifact powerful enough to break both the curse and the bond. It's been lost for 300 years. Every vampire scholar in existence has searched for it. No one knows where it is, if it even still exists, and—" He stopped as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. "And what?" Stephen's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something like fear in them. "And the vampire court has summoned us both to trial at sunset. Human-vampire bonds violate the sacred laws. The punishment is death for both parties." "Death?" Ella's voice cracked. "But you just said if one of us dies." "They know. They'll execute us simultaneously. A mercy, they'll call it." 30 days? You said the curse activates in 30 days? The court won't wait that long. They've scheduled the execution for winter solstice, the same night the curse would kill us anyway. Poetic justice. His smile held no humor. They'll claim they're putting us out of our misery. Ella stood, fists clenched. "Then we find this grimoire." "I just told you it's been lost for 3 centuries. Then we find it in 29 days. She moved closer until they were separated by inches, until she could feel his heartbeat syncing with hers, could sense the exact distance between them through the cursed thread connecting them. So, do we have a deal, or do we both die arguing in a cell? The door opened before he could answer. A guard in ceremonial armor stood in the threshold, silver sword gleaming. The court awaits, both of you, now. The grand hall of Ashford Manor had been transformed. Gone were the gala decorations and champagne fountains. In their place rose a chamber of judgment that looked like it had been waiting beneath the surface all along. Ancient stone, vaulted ceilings lost in shadow, and 7 throne-like seats arranged in a semicircle on an elevated platform. The elders sat in those seats, each one a study in immortal power. They wore robes that ranged from medieval to Renaissance to Victorian, as though they'd simply never bothered updating their wardrobes across the centuries. Their faces were ageless, but their eyes were old, older than the manor, older than the country itself. Below them, hundreds of vampires filled the hall. They stood in absolute silence, watching Ella and Stephen with the fixed attention of predators deciding whether something was prey or threat. Ella's legs shook as the guards marched them down the center aisle. She could feel every eye on her, could feel Stephen's controlled fury through the bond, could feel her own heartbeat trying to hammer its way out of her chest. At the head of the elders sat a man who looked 40 but carried himself like a king. His hair was iron gray, his suit impeccable, and when he spoke, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Stephen Alaric Jones, Elder Constantine's voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. You stand accused of performing a forbidden blood rite, creating an illegal bond with a human, and endangering the masquerade that protects us all. How do you answer? The ritual was meant to break the curse on my bloodline, Stephen said, his voice steady. The bond was an accident. Accidents have consequences. Constantine's gaze shifted to Ella, and she felt his attention like a physical weight. The human must die. The bond must be severed. The bond is unbreakable, Stephen said. Kill her and you kill me. A ripple went through the assembled vampires. Surprise, calculation, hunger. Constantine's expression didn't change. Then you both die. Winter solstice, public execution. 30 days to settle your affairs, another elder added, this one a woman whose beauty was as sharp as broken glass. Consider it a mercy. A mercy? Ella's voice cracked through the hall before she could stop herself. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be bonded to him. I didn't ask to be part of your world. I didn't... The silence that followed was absolute. Constantine leaned forward, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his ancient eyes. The human speaks, bold but irrelevant. Is it? A new voice, smooth as silk and twice as deadly. A woman rose from the crowd, tall, elegant, wearing a gown that looked like it had been sewn from midnight itself. Her face was beautiful the way a knife was beautiful, perfect, cold, designed to cut. The bloodline curse is her fate now too, isn't it, Stephen? Stephen went rigid beside Ella. Through the bond, she felt recognition slam into him like a fist. Morgana. Lady Morgana smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Ella had ever seen. When the solstice comes, when my curse awakens, it will consume not just the Jones bloodline, but everyone bound to it, including your new pet. She turned to the elders. Why waste resources on an execution when the curse will do it for us? Let them have their 30 days. Let them feel the countdown. It's what I designed it for. She's the one who cursed you? Ella whispered. 3 centuries ago, Stephen said quietly. She's the reason my family dies screaming every 7th generation. Constantine nodded slowly. Very well, 30 days. You will be confined to the Jones estate under blood guard. Any attempt to flee, any violation of our laws, and the execution will be immediate. Use your time wisely. And human, Learn your place. You don't speak in this court. You don't speak in our world. You are a mistake that will be corrected in 30 days. The guards closed in, but before they could move, a figure stepped from the crowd, a vampire with dark hair and scholar's robes, younger looking than most, with eyes that held genuine concern instead of predatory calculation. "My lord," he said, bowing to Constantine, "if I may, I'm Marcus Laurent, archivist of the old libraries. If there's even a chance the grimoire exists, I may know where to start looking." He glanced at Stephen and Ella. "Come to my library tomorrow. I can't promise anything, but it's more than we have now," Stephen finished. "Thank you, Marcus." The guards pulled them towards the exit. Ella looked back once and saw Morgana watching them with a smile that promised suffering. Through the bond, she felt Stephen's cold determination rising to match the cruelty of the vampire. 30 days. They had 30 days to find a grimoire lost for 300 years, break an unbreakable curse, and somehow survive a world that wanted them dead. Ella had faced worse odds. She just couldn't remember when. Stephen's estate sat on 20 acres of forested land, surrounded by walls that looked decorative but felt like a prison. The house itself was all dark wood and stone, floor-to-ceiling windows that showed nothing but trees, and silence so complete Ella could hear her own pulse, both of them, hers and Stephen's, beating in uncomfortable syncopation. The blood guard introduced themselves with cold efficiency, 2 vampire sentinels who would watch the perimeter, monitor all exits, and ensure neither she nor Stephen left the grounds without court permission. They didn't bother pretending this was for their protection. Ella's assigned suite was larger than her entire apartment back home. 4-poster bed, marble bathroom, a wardrobe full of clothes in exactly her size that someone must have procured while she was in the cell. It should have felt like luxury. Instead, it felt like a very expensive cage. She stood at the window, watching snow fall through bare branches, and felt Stephen pacing 3 floors below. The bond had grown stronger overnight. Now she could sense not just his heartbeat, but his emotions, a constant background radiation of ancient rage and iron control. And he could feel hers. Fear, exhaustion, and a determination that surprised them both. "Stop broadcasting," his voice said in her head, and Ella jumped. "Your panic is distracting." "Then stop pacing like a caged animal," she thought back. "Your rage is giving me a headache." A pause, then quieter. "Fair enough." Marcus arrived at dawn with a leather satchel and shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. Stephen's library was vast, 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, rolling ladders, and the smell of old paper and older secrets. Marcus spread maps across a mahogany table, his hands shaking slightly. "I've researched everything I could find on the curse, the bond, the grimoire." He looked up at them with something like hope. "There's a chance. The blood grimoire is real. I found references in 3 separate archives." "Where?" Stephen demanded. "Blackwood Catacombs, beneath the old city, in the vampire underground. It's dangerous. The catacombs have guardians, ancient protections, but this map shows a route, and you'll need this." Marcus pulled an amulet from his satchel, a disc of tarnished silver etched with the same geometric patterns that had been on Stephen's ritual floor. "It protects against the guardians. Without it, you won't make it past the first chamber." "When do we leave?" Ella asked. "Nightfall. The guards change shifts at sunset. You'll have a 30-minute window." Marcus started rolling up the maps, but his hands fumbled, and Ella noticed the tremor had gotten worse. "Marcus," she said slowly, "are you all right?" "Fine, just tired." He wouldn't meet her eyes. That's when Ella saw it, a letter on the corner of his desk, half hidden under books, sealed with dark red wax. The seal bore a symbol she'd seen once before, on the ring Lady Morgana wore in the court. Ice flooded her veins. "You're working for her." Marcus went very still. Stephen's head snapped up, and through the bond, Ella felt his rage ignite like a furnace. "Marcus?" Stephen's voice was deadly quiet. "Tell me she's wrong." "I'm sorry." His face crumpled. "She has my sister. She said if I didn't lead you into the trap, she'd kill her. I didn't. I never wanted to." The library doors exploded inward. Blood guards poured through. Not the sentinels from outside, but Morgana's personal soldiers, armed with silver and moving with lethal purpose. Ella didn't think. She grabbed the map from the table and ran. "Go!" Stephen's shout echoed as he intercepted the first guard with inhuman speed. "Get out!" "Not without you," Ella threw back through the bond. "You die, I die, remember?" He felt his surprise, then his grudging respect. He caught her hand as she reached the corridor, and they ran together. Through the manor, down servant stairs, guards crashing behind them. Stephen moved with supernatural grace, pulling her along, but when a guard appeared in front of them, Ella was the one who grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it into his face. They burst through a service exit into cold rain and darkness. Behind them, the manor blazed with light and shouting. Ahead was only forest and the faint glow of the city beyond the walls. "Can you climb?" Stephen asked. "Can you?" Ella shot back. His laugh was sharp and genuine. Then he grabbed her waist and leaped, and they were soaring over the wall in an arc that defied physics, landing in wet grass on the other side. They ran into the night together, the bond singing between them like a wire pulled tight. And for the first time since the ritual, Ella felt something besides fear. She felt alive. The entrance to the old city sewers was hidden behind a condemned building 3 blocks from the financial district. Stephen pried open the rusted grate with his bare hands while Ella kept watch, the stolen map clutched against her chest. The smell that rose from below was decay and damp stone, and something older, something that made her hindbrain scream warnings about places humans weren't meant to go. "Last chance to reconsider," Stephen said, but through the bond, Ella felt he didn't mean it. He was impressed she'd come this far. "My brother's counting on me." She swung her legs over the edge. "Besides, you need someone to tell you when you're being an idiot." His laugh echoed down into the darkness. "Fair point." The sewers gave way to older tunnels, Roman-era stonework that bled into something even more ancient. Black wood catacombs announced themselves with walls made entirely of bones, femurs and skulls arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long, mosaics of mortality stretching into shadow. Torches in iron brackets flickered with flames that burned without fuel, casting light that seemed to swallow more than it revealed. Ella's hands shook as she unfolded the map, but her voice stayed steady. "Marcus said to follow the markers. 3 left turns, then straight until we reach the Chapel of Forgotten Saints. If you're afraid, you can wait here." "If I'm afraid, I keep moving." She met his ice-blue eyes in the torchlight. "That's how you survive poverty. You don't stop." Something shifted in Stephen's expression. Recognition, maybe. Even respect. Through the bond, she felt his isolation crack just slightly, letting her glimpse the centuries of loneliness beneath his cold exterior. They moved in synchronization, the bond allowing them to coordinate without words. When Stephen sensed danger ahead, Ella felt the warning and stopped. When Ella noticed a false path, Stephen trusted her instinct immediately. They were learning to be 2 parts of one survival machine. The Guardian appeared at the second junction, a skeletal figure wreathed in red mist, its bones fused with armor that looked grown rather than forged. It shrieked in a voice like tearing metal and lunged. Stephen met it with supernatural speed, but his fist passed through spectral ribs without impact. The wraith's claws raked his shoulder, and Ella felt the burning pain echo through the bond. He staggered back, dark blood seeping through his torn shirt. "Silver!" he gasped. "It's manifesting silver!" Ella's mind raced. Catholic school, 12 years of Mass and catechism, Sister Margaret droning about sanctified water and blessed salt. "The chapel," she said. "Marcus's map shows a fountain." They ran, the wraith floating behind them with inexorable patience. The chapel of forgotten saints was barely more than an alcove. Its altar crumbled, but the fountain still stood, a stone basin carved with prayers in Latin. Ella didn't think. She cupped her hands, filled them with water that looked clear but felt heavy, and threw it at the advancing wraith. The creature screamed and dissolved, bones clattering to the floor as the red mist evaporated. Stephen stared at her. "How did you—" Sometimes the help knows things rich people forgot. Ella wiped her hands on her pants, fighting to keep them steady. "Come on, we're not done yet." The deeper chambers required Marcus's map. They navigated in silence at first, but somewhere between the Hall of Empty Thrones and the Passage of Final Breath, they began to talk. Stephen spoke of 300 years watching his family die in 7-generation cycles, of being feared even by other vampires, of isolation that turned decades into white noise. Ella spoke of invisible labor, of being furniture in other people's lives, of a brother who needed her and a future that felt like a closing door. "We're not so different," Stephen said quietly, "both trapped by things we didn't choose. Except you chose to live for centuries. I'm just trying to make it to next month." "Are you?" He glanced at her. "Or are you fighting for something more?" The grimoire chamber appeared exactly where Marcus had marked it. The door was sealed with a lock that looked organic, veins of metal spreading across stone like frozen blood. Ancient text carved above it read, "Only those bound by blood may enter." Stephen drew a knife from his boot. "My blood and mine, together." Ella held out her palm. The blade bit quick and sharp, and she watched her blood well up, bright red and human. Stephen cut his own palm, and his was darker, almost black in the dim light. They pressed their palms together, and the lock recognized what they were: bound, cursed, neither fully one thing nor another. The door groaned open. The grimoire sat on a stone pedestal in the center of a circular chamber, pulsing with the same unholy light as Stephen's chalice. It was bound in leather that looked disturbingly like skin, clasped with iron that had rusted to the color of dried blood. Ella reached for it. The ceiling exploded. Stone blocks crashed down, and Ella threw herself backwards as the pedestal shattered. The grimoire tumbled across the floor, and she scrambled for it, even as the chamber collapsed around them. Through the dust and chaos, she saw symbols carved in the falling stones. Marcus's handwriting. "He knew it," Stephen said, his voice filled with cold fury. "Then we get out before we die, proving him right." Ella grabbed the grimoire and Stephen's hand in the same motion. "Move!" They ran as the Blackwood catacombs came down around them, and somewhere far above, Ella imagined Marcus watching with his sister's life in Morgana's hands, and she understood that sometimes betrayal was just another kind of trap, one with no good choices, only less terrible ones. The ceiling came down like the wrath of ancient gods. One moment Ella was reaching for the grimoire, the next she was diving backward as stone blocks the size of refrigerators crashed between them. Dust exploded through the chamber, turning the air into a choking gray soup. She couldn't see Stephen through the debris wall, but she could feel him, his panic slamming into her chest like a physical blow, his fear mixing with her own until she couldn't tell where his terror ended and hers began. "Ella!" His voice came muffled through tons of collapsing stone. "I'm alive!" she coughed, pressing her back against the trembling wall. The entire catacomb was coming apart, Marcus's final betrayal complete. Above her, cracks spiderwebbed across the vaulted ceiling. She had maybe 60 seconds before this became her tomb. Her catering instincts kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. How many times had she worked events in converted warehouses and historical buildings? How many times had the crew chief pointed out which beams were original, which walls were decorative, which columns actually held up the structure? She'd learned to read buildings the way Stephen read ancient texts, understanding what mattered and what was just for show. Ella's eyes traced the falling pattern. The western columns were crumbling, but the eastern side, those thick pillars with the different stonework, those were original, load-bearing. If the weight shifted... "Stephen!" she screamed over the roar of destruction. "The eastern column! Hit the eastern column as hard as you can!" Silence. Then his voice, strained with supernatural effort, fighting against collapsing stone. "That'll bring down the entire... It'll redirect the collapse, trust me." The pause felt eternal. Then she heard it. The sound of a vampire using centuries of accumulated strength. The impact shook her bones. The eastern column exploded outward, and like a massive puzzle solving itself in reverse, the falling debris shifted. Stone blocks tumbled away from them instead of toward them. A narrow passage opened, just wide enough for a body to squeeze through. Stephen appeared through the gap, grimoire clutched against his chest, his pale features gray with dust. He grabbed her hand and they ran as the chamber imploded behind them, the sound of 1,000 tons of stone entombing Marcus's trap forever. They surfaced in an abandoned warehouse district, gasping, covered in centuries of grave dust. Rain hammered the broken windows. Stephen set the grimoire on a rusted metal table, and together they opened it with shaking hands. The ancient text swam, then steadied, becoming readable. Ella's hope died with each word. "The bond can only be broken by sacrifice," she read aloud, her voice hollow. "One must willingly embrace death for the other to live." Stephen's jaw clenched. "So we're still trapped. Unless we die together," Ella laughed bitterly. "Some escape." Then her eyes caught on a passage below, half hidden in the margin. Her heart stuttered. "Wait, look at this." Her finger traced the faded ink. "Alternative ritual. Transformation of essence." She looked up at Stephen, desperate hope flaring. Not death, change. His eyes widened, scanning the text. "Well, thank you for finding it." They spun. Lady Morgana stood in the warehouse entrance, her vampire court arrayed behind her like pieces on a chessboard. Marcus was with them, his face a mask of shame. Morgana crossed the distance with inhuman speed. The grimoire was ripped from Ella's hands before she could even scream. "I'll take that." They dragged Ella and Stephen back to Ashford Manor in chains that burned against vampire flesh and cut into human wrists. The ritual chamber had been prepared for this moment, the winter solstice, when the veil between life and death grew thin enough for curses to feast. Candles formed concentric circles around a raised platform, their flames casting dancing shadows across ancient symbols carved into the floor. Morgana swept into the chamber like a queen claiming her throne, the grimoire open in her hands. "Do you know what your bloodline represents, Stephen?" Her voice dripped with centuries of bitter envy. Power accumulated over generations, strength that could reshape the vampire world. She smiled, cold and beautiful. "And tonight, I take it all." The vampire court assembled in tiered seats surrounding the ritual space. Elder Constantine, the 7 houses, dozens of immortal witnesses. Ella and Stephen were bound within the circle of power, heavy iron chains anchored to the floor. The moment the ritual began, Ella felt it, a burning that started in her chest and spread through her veins like liquid fire. Morgana's incantation rose, each syllable pulling at the curse that had slept in Stephen's bloodline for generations. The energy flowed from him, through Ella. She was the conduit. The bond between them turned into a channel and into Morgana. Ella could feel herself weakening, her life force draining with each passing second. Stephen screamed, his back arching against the chains, his ancient strength being ripped away. Morgana's skin smoothed, her eyes brightened. She was growing younger, stronger, drunk on stolen power. Ella's vision blurred. In the haze of approaching death, the grimoire passage crystallized in her mind. Transformation of essence, not breaking, completing. She finally understood. "Stephen," she whispered through the bond, the psychic connection between them still holding even as everything else fell apart. "Trust me, don't fight it." "What?" His mental voice was raw with pain. "I'm not breaking the bond, I'm completing it." Instead of resisting the curse energy tearing through her, Ella pulled it in. She stopped fighting and started absorbing. The ritual shuddered, its flow disrupted. She wasn't dying, she was changing. Her cells restructured, neither human nor vampire, but something that had never existed before. Her eyes snapped open, glowing not red like vampire eyes, but gold like captured sunlight. The bond between her and Stephen didn't break. It became steel, became bedrock, became a force that could reshape reality. Power exploded outward. The feedback loop overloaded Morgana's spell, and the ancient vampire staggered backward, her stolen strength suddenly unstable. Ella felt the chains around her wrists snap like thread. She rose, her hybrid nature humming with unprecedented power. Throughout the chamber, she could feel every blood bond, threads connecting maker to progeny, master to servant, a web of supernatural connections suddenly visible to her transformed senses. She yanked them like puppet strings. Vampires throughout the court fell to their knees, gasping. Ella turned to Morgana, who stared at her with something that might have been fear. "You wanted bloodline power?" Ella's voice resonated with dual tones, human warmth and vampire cold. "Here it is." She channeled everything, Stephen's centuries of strength, her own humanity, the hybrid nature that broke every supernatural law. Stephen's chains shattered. He launched himself at Morgana as Ella's power tore through the ancient curse that had bound his family for generations. Together, they struck. Morgana's scream cut off abruptly as she crumbled, turning to dust that scattered across the ritual floor. Silence. Elder Constantine stood slowly, his ancient eyes fixed on Ella. "What are you?" Ella met his gaze without flinching. "Something new. Something necessary."
3 months after the winter solstice, the vampire court convened in the grand hall of Ashford Manor, but this time Ella Winslow walked through those doors as something other than prey. She wore no server's uniform, no apologetic smile, no instinct to make herself small and invisible. Her eyes, still that warm brown, but now capable of seeing the supernatural threads that bound the vampire world together, swept across the assembled immortals with quiet confidence. Elder Constantine addressed the court. Blood Arbiter Winslow has identified 3 cases of forced bonding this month alone. His ancient voice carried approval. The humans have been freed, the perpetrators face judgment. Ella's official title was barely 3 months old, but already the vampire world was learning what it meant. She could sense blood bonds the way normal humans sensed temperature, instinctively, constantly. More importantly, she could moderate them, prevent their abuse, ensure that no human ever again found themselves trapped the way she had been. It was power born from trauma, and she wielded it without apology. Her brother's medical bills had disappeared the day after her transformation, paid in full by vampire resources Constantine himself had allocated. An investment in the new order, he'd called it. Ella called it what her voice was finally worth. She was building frameworks, writing protocols, creating the systems that would protect humans who found themselves tangled in supernatural politics. No more invisible servers stumbling into curses, no more collateral damage. Stephen stood at her side during these proceedings, but not above her or behind her, beside her. Equals who had chosen partnership after fate had tried to force their hands. Later, in the quiet of Stephen's library where this had all begun with a grimoire and impossible choices, Ella stood by the window watching night settle over the city. Stephen joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand, one red, one white. Even in small gestures, they honored what each of them was. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "The transformation?" Ella considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Her life had been destroyed and rebuilt in the span of 30 days. She'd died and been reborn as something the world had never seen. "I regret the screaming," she finally said. "Everything else I chose." "Even me?" She turned to face him, and the bond between them pulsed, steady, warm, no longer a chain, but a choice renewed with every heartbeat. "Especially you." They could still feel each other's heartbeats, that original curse transformed into something more profound, but now it was comfort instead of compulsion, intimacy instead of imprisonment. "We should go," Stephen said with a glance toward the door. "The Council of Houses waits for no one." Ella smiled and settled deeper into her chair, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "Let them wait. They've had centuries. We've earned 5 minutes." Stephen's rare smile appeared, and he sat beside her. "Sometimes the scream that destroys your life is the same one that gives you a voice, and once you have that voice, you don't stay quiet ever again."
Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more intriguing stories.